So I'm from Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in the Pittsburgh region. I was born in Philadelphia, and I'm primarily based in Pittsburgh, but I also do work in Baltimore as well as a little bit of stuff in New York City. But I'm primarily East Coast based, and I've been there my whole life.
So you've been in Pittsburgh your whole life, born, raised there now?
Well, I was born in Philadelphia, which is on the other side of the state, but I moved to the Pittsburgh area around the age of like 2 or so, and then I went to high school there. I went to college in Pittsburgh. I ended up being faculty at one of the universities there, and I work at the medical centers there as well. So Pittsburgh is sort of my home, and probably will be for the foreseeable future, my home base, but I do travel a lot throughout the East Coast.
And what drew you to medicine?
I liked all the detective work. Both of my parents are physicians, and it was something I was exposed to at a very young age, almost continually. And it was something in the back of my mind that I always wanted to do medicine. My parents didn't push me one way or another, actually probably pushed me away from medicine because it had changed a lot over the last several decades. But I kept getting drawn back to it. And specific parts of it, all of the mystery and all of the way it integrates with other things that are going on in the world really was something that I found fascinating and really challenging, and something that I really couldn't find anywhere else. So I worked a little bit doing finance and stuff when I first finished college, but I changed my mind pretty quickly and decided I wanted to go into medicine, and specifically I wanted to focus on infectious disease because that's where I thought the most challenging problems were, the most interesting topics were, and the part of medicine that really had this cascading effect everywhere into all fields is really only found in infectious disease.
Yeah, so what do you mean by that? Because you said you were drawn to it because it incorporated so many other fields.
So when someone has an infection, think about, you have to say, how did they get this? Who were they in contact with? What put them at risk for this? What are the implications for this? And there are certain diseases, and one case would be a national worldwide emergency. So if somebody had smallpox today, one case would be a national security emergency for every country in the world. There's never been any kind of medical condition that's toppled empires or changed the courses of war. All of that's been infectious disease. So if you look at, for example, Napoleon's invasion of Russia, that likely failed because of an outbreak of typhus among his soldiers. Or if you look at the Black Death killing 1/3 of the population of Europe and how it changed the whole structure there, where the whole feudal system broke down because the peasants basically revolted because there were so many more of them now and less structure to the society. Or you look at pandemic flu, and it's the way the 1918 pandemic came on the heels of World War I. All of these things are not something you'll see if you talk about a heart attack or cancer or high cholesterol.
Right, because you have to talk about history, geography, migration, politics, I'm sure,
right. Yeah.
all these areas.
Yeah, and I don't think you'll find that it's something that is not lost on infectious disease, but many people don't appreciate it from the outside because it's not just the same thing as being a radiologist or a dermatologist. This really has a huge scope. And when you ask the general public to name a doctor, they're going to name somebody or name somebody from medicine. They're going to say something like Louis Pasteur or Jonas Salk. And it's not surprising that they're naming people from infectious diseases because those are things that people have dealt with all throughout history, whereas it's very hard to ask someone to name a famous cardiologist. Most people could not do it.
Gotcha. So your actual specific areas are infectious diseases, critical care medicine, emergency medicine. Is that right?
Right. I knew I wanted to do infectious disease, but I didn't want to just be an infectious disease doctor. I was very interested in pandemics, disasters, emerging infectious diseases, and bioterrorism. And I thought that the best way to get that 360-degree view of this would be to have experience in emergency medicine, because that's where many of these infections present to. They don't just show up to an infectious disease doctor. They show up in emergency departments, like we saw in 2014 with Dallas in the Ebola outbreak, with the 3 cases that occurred in Dallas. They showed up in an emergency department. And people get very sick and they end up in the intensive care unit. So there's a lot of cross-disciplinary work between infectious disease and critical care because, for example, during a pandemic of influenza, there's going to be lots of people in the intensive care unit on mechanical ventilators. So having those skills, the emergency medicine skill set and the critical care skill set, gave me, I think, a unique way to look at infectious disease and approach infectious disease from a multidisciplinary standpoint that really, I think, helps me understand a problem in a way that many other people in the field can't, because I can see where it's going to implicate other parts of the healthcare system and how other physician specialties are going to deal with this. And there's lots of things that get promulgated down to emergency departments and ICUs, and I think it's better to have that perspective coming from people who. So when I say that an emergency department should be able to test for such and such a disease, I think it goes over better knowing the fact that I am an emergency medicine physician as well, that I work in an emergency department, so I understand the constraints and issues that happen there. And the same goes for the ICU. So I'm not some just infectious disease doctor pontificating without any understanding of how an emergency department works or how an ICU works.
So do you work in emergency departments a lot, and do you do that locally in your area, or do you travel a lot wherever these are occurring? What does kind of an everyday look like for you?
So every day is a little bit different for me, but I do work in emergency departments a couple times a month in my local area, and that's something I just do. As a regular part of my work, and I do infectious diseases as well, where I consult on cases at a major medical center, and then I also do critical care at a major medical center. So I do those. That's kind of my clinical part of my life, which is about 50% of what I do, and then the rest of it is I work at a think tank where I think about these issues at a more broader scale and looking at the policy issues that are going on with infectious disease, or I spend a lot of time talking to the media about infectious disease, writing about infectious disease, and thinking about what the next big thing might be or how to prepare for it.
Yeah, you have your blog.
Right.
Tracking Zebra?
Right. Yeah. So I started a blog several years ago because I wanted to have a way to talk about these things in a kind of an uncensored manner where I could really just say what I thought were the major issues going on. And I came up with the name Tracking Zebra because it's kind of a term of art in my field, or in medicine in general. It comes from this idea: when you're a medical student, anytime you see a case of whatever it might be, the medical student invariably will pick the most rare cause of what it could be. So you're all often admonished, when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras, because it's much more common to hear. What's common is common. But in my field, with infectious disease, I'm really worried about the zebras, things that are going to come from another part of the world, or something that's never been seen before, or something that changed. So I'm tracking zebras rather than tracking horses. That's kind of where the blog comes from. And I use the blog to speak about these topics, to talk about some of the books that come out in the field, and use it kind of as a centerpiece for what I'm trying to do.
When did you start your blog?
I started it around 2012 or so, and it's kind of gone through stages where sometimes I post a lot, sometimes I post less. I think after Ebola, because I was doing so much general traditional media, I got less likely to use it and was more likely to try and publish op-eds or speak to the media directly about it. But I still use it as a tool.
Mm-hmm. And who's your audience?
My audience is anybody that's interested in science. So that could be people that are in my profession, that are physicians or scientists, as well as public health professionals, and the general public that has some interest in what's going on, because I do try to write at a level that's accessible to all different people that might find some interest. So I will have the technical information there, as well as a way to think about it if you're not technically oriented towards some of these. And I often have actionable items there, saying these are the three most important questions to think about with such and such or whatever's going on. So I try to keep it at that level. On
kind of a side note, where do you find the time to post so much? Because you blog probably what once a week?
My blogs used to be daily. They're less frequent now, but I think most of my time is focused on Twitter, which I do spend a lot of time trying to keep abreast of everything that goes on. And I use Twitter more as a memory tool for myself, because there's so much going on that if you just read the newspapers, you wouldn't actually see, because it only when it bubbles over to public panic do you see it in the general press often. But I actually carve out time every day to make sure that I keep up to date with that. And I think it's not something I think of as separate from my career. I think it's part of what I want to do, is keep up to date on these things. And I like to put this stuff out on Twitter because there's so much of an opportunity to amplify what you're saying there and get people thinking about these issues if you actually collate it and put it in the proper context. And that's what I try to think of as a key role that I'm playing in the field.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.